The grand ballroom of the London Palace shimmered with 1,000 candles, their light dancing across Victoria's ivory wedding gown as she stood beside the vampire king, Lucian. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the ancient ceremonial goblet, trying not to spill the crimson wine that symbolized their eternal bond. The gathered nobles, both vampire and human, watched in hushed reverence as the most powerful being in all of England prepared to take a mortal bride. Lucian's eyes, usually cold as winter moonlight, held something different tonight. As he gazed at Victoria, there was a flicker of warmth that made her heart race with hope. For 3 months, she had slowly fallen for the lonely king who spent his nights reading poetry in the castle gardens and secretly left gold coins on the doorsteps of London's poorest families. Behind his fearsome reputation, she had discovered a soul burdened by centuries of solitude and the weight of protecting both vampire and human subjects from those who would see them at war. The ceremony concluded with thunderous applause, but as the guests departed and the newlyweds retreated to the king's private chambers, Lucian's expression grew grave. He walked to the massive window overlooking the gaslit streets of London, his broad shoulders tense beneath his ceremonial robes. Victoria approached him slowly, her silk slippers whispering against the marble floor. "There's something I must tell you," Lucian said, his deep voice carrying a weight that made Victoria's stomach tighten. "Something I couldn't say until you were truly mine, until you were under my protection." He turned to face her, and in his ancient eyes, she saw not the coldness she expected, but profound sorrow mixed with fierce determination. "Victoria, you must leave London tonight. You must go far from here and never return." The words hung in the air like shards of ice. Victoria felt her knees weaken, her wedding bouquet slipping from her fingers and scattering white roses across the floor. "But I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Don't you want me?" Lucian crossed the room in a blur of vampire speed, catching her before she could fall. His hands, usually so cold, felt warm against her arms. "Listen to me carefully. 3 days ago, I discovered a conspiracy among the Elder Council. They plan to use you to control me, to turn you into something monstrous as leverage against my throne. The only way I can protect you is to make them believe I've cast you aside, that you mean nothing to me." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she searched his face. "So this marriage, it was all just to protect me." "No," Lucian whispered, pulling her close for the first time since their wedding kiss. "This marriage was the only way I could ensure your safety under vampire law. As my wife, even in exile, you have my protection. Any who harm you face immediate execution." His voice broke slightly, revealing an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "I've lived for 8 centuries, Victoria, and in all that time, I've never felt what I feel when I look at you. Your kindness toward my servants, your laughter in the garden, the way you see past the monster to find the man. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope." A sharp knock echoed through the chamber. "My lord," came a nervous voice. "The council demands your presence. They've heard about the Queen's departure." Lucian's jaw tightened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch, pressing it into Victoria's hands. Inside was an ancient compass that pulsed with a soft blue light and a letter sealed with his personal crest. "Take the hidden passage behind the tapestry. My most trusted friend, Marcus, waits with a carriage. This compass will always point you toward safety, and when the time is right, it will bring you back to me." "How will I know when it's safe?" Victoria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before Lucian could answer, the door burst open. 3 elder vampires stood in the doorway, their faces twisted with suspicious smiles. "Leaving so soon, young queen?" the tallest one hissed. "The night is still young, and we have so much to discuss about your new responsibilities." Lucian stepped smoothly between Victoria and the elders, his entire demeanor shifting from loving husband to the fearsome vampire king of legend. The queen was just retiring for the evening, alone. His voice carried such authority that even the ancient vampires took an involuntary step back. "Alone, on your wedding night? Elder Matthias raised an eyebrow, his suspicious gaze trying to peer around Lucian at Victoria. How unusual. Victoria understood the game now. Squaring her shoulders, she let out a bitter laugh that surprised everyone, including herself. Unusual? Is it unusual to discover on your wedding night that your husband finds you inadequate? She put every ounce of false hurt and anger into her voice. The great vampire king apparently prefers his solitude to his bride. So yes, gentlemen, I'll be retiring. Alone. The performance was so convincing that even Lucian flinched. The elders exchanged delighted glances, clearly pleased by this unexpected turn. As Victoria swept past them toward the door, head held high despite her breaking heart, Elder Catherine called out with false sympathy, "Perhaps a trip abroad might help you recover from this." Disappointment, dear. Perhaps it might, Victoria replied coldly, not looking back. 20 minutes later, Victoria found herself in a carriage racing through the foggy London streets, tears streaming down her face as Marcus, a kind-faced vampire with graying temples, handed her a handkerchief. "The king chose well," he said gently. Not many could have played that scene so convincingly. "It wasn't entirely an act," Victoria admitted, clutching the compass that grew warmer in her hands. "The pain was real, even if the anger wasn't." Marcus smiled sadly. "In my 400 years serving the crown, I've never seen Lucian look at anyone the way he looks at you. This sacrifice is killing him, but he would rather die than see harm come to you." The carriage suddenly lurched to a stop. Outside, Victoria heard shouting and the clash of steel. "Bandits?" she asked, but Marcus was already shaking his head, his fangs extending as his expression turned grim. "Vampire assassins, the council didn't believe your performance." He turned to her urgently. "Can you ride?" "Yes, but..." Marcus was already opening a hidden panel in the carriage floor, revealing a tunnel entrance. "This leads to the stables. Take Midnight, the black mare. Ride hard for Dover. There's a ship called the White Swan leaving at dawn. The captain is expecting you." He pressed another pouch into her hands. "The king said to tell you, remember the poem you read together in the garden. The answer is there." Before Victoria could respond, the carriage door was ripped from its hinges. Marcus pushed her toward the tunnel as 3 vampire assassins descended upon them. "Go, now." Victoria dropped into the tunnel, her wedding dress catching and tearing on the rough edges. Behind her, she heard Marcus roar with a fury that shook the very ground. The tunnel was pitch black, but the compass in her hand glowed brighter, illuminating her path. She ran, her heart pounding, following the twisting passages until she emerged in a stable that smelled of hay and horses. Midnight whinnied softly as Victoria approached, as if the mare had been expecting her. With shaking hands, Victoria hiked up what remained of her wedding dress and mounted the horse. As she rode out into the night, she heard an inhuman howl echo from the direction of the carriage, a sound of victory or defeat, she couldn't tell. The journey to Dover was a blur of dark roads and racing heartbeats. Victoria arrived just as the first rays of dawn painted the sky pink and gold. The White Swan sat in the harbor, its sails already being prepared. As she boarded, her wedding dress now more tatters than lace, the captain, a weather-worn woman with knowing eyes, simply nodded and showed her to a cabin. It wasn't until the ship had left English waters that Victoria finally opened the letter Lucian had given her. His elegant handwriting blurred through her tears as she read. "My beloved Victoria, if you are reading this, then you are safe, and that is all that matters. The council's corruption runs deeper than I knew. They plan to start a war between vampires and humans, using fear to seize absolute power. You were to be their weapon against me, turned against your will and used to break my spirit. I could not let that happen. But know this, I have not abandoned you. I have sent you away to become something more powerful than they could imagine. In Paris, you will find the Order of the Dawn, a secret society of humans and vampires working together for peace. They will teach you things I cannot. You will learn to fight, to lead, and most importantly, to bridge two worlds. The compass will grow cold when you are ready to return. Until then, know that every sunset I watch alone is a promise that one day we will watch them together. The elders believe love makes us weak. We will prove that it makes us unstoppable. Forever yours, Lucian. P.S. The poem, my darling. 3rd stanza, 7th line. Victoria pulled out the small poetry book from her traveling bag, the one thing she'd managed to grab from the carriage. She found the poem they'd read that magical night in the garden, her finger trailing to the mentioned line. Truth lives not in words, but in the silence between heartbeats. As she puzzled over the meaning, she noticed something strange. Holding the compass near the book, hidden text appeared on the page, glowing with the same blue light. When the moon turns red and the Thames runs backward, the truth will set us free. 6 months had passed since that fateful wedding night. Victoria stood in the morning light of a Parisian courtyard, her once soft hands now calloused from sword training, her gentle demeanor now backed by quiet strength. The Order of the Dawn had transformed her from a frightened bride into a formidable warrior diplomat, one who could negotiate with vampire lords at midnight and teach human children at dawn. "You're ready," announced Madame Evangeline, the ancient vampire who led the order. Despite being over 1,000 years old, she moved with the grace of a dancer. "The news from London grows darker. Your husband plays a dangerous game, pretending to be the elder's puppet while secretly gathering allies." Victoria's heart clenched at the mention of Lucian. Every night she held the compass, feeling its steady warmth, a sign he was still alive, still fighting. "The coded messages in the London newspapers speak of a blood moon approaching," Victoria said. "That must be when they plan to strike." Indeed, the elders intend to perform an ancient ritual that will give them control over all vampires, making them slaves to the council's will. Even Lucian won't be able to resist. Evangeline handed her a sealed envelope. "But we have discovered something they don't know. The ritual requires the willing participation of a queen. Without you, they cannot complete it." "Then why send me back? I'm safer here." Evangeline smiled, revealing fangs that glinted like pearls. "Because, my dear, you're not going back as the scared girl who fled London. You're returning as the leader of the Dawn Alliance, with 200 of our best fighters, both human and vampire, loyal to peace and to you." That night, Victoria stood on her balcony, the compass suddenly growing ice cold in her hand. It was time. As she prepared for the journey home, a bat landed on her windowsill, transforming into a young vampire messenger. "Your Majesty," he panted, "urgent news from London. King Lucian has been imprisoned by the council. They plan to execute him during the blood moon unless you return to take your place at their side." Victoria's mind raced. It was a trap, obviously, but Lucian was in real danger. She thought of the poem's hidden message. When the moon turns red and the Thames runs backward, the truth will set us free. The Thames running backward. That was an old legend about a time when vampire magic was so strong it could reverse nature itself, but truth setting them free. "Gather the alliance," she commanded with an authority that surprised even her. "We leave for London tonight, and send word to every friend of peace in England. The Queen returns not as a victim, but as a liberator." The journey to London was swift, their convoy moving with supernatural speed under cover of darkness. As they approached the city, Victoria saw it had changed. The streets were darker, fear hanging in the air like fog. Humans hurried indoors before sunset, and vampires prowled with new arrogance. At the gates of the palace, Victoria stood tall in her battle armor, a gift from the Order, inscribed with symbols that protected against vampire compulsion. The guards, recognizing her, fell to their knees. "Your Majesty, the council," they said, "you were dead." "Stories of my death were greatly exaggerated," Victoria replied with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now open the gates. I have business with my husband's captors." The throne room was packed with vampire nobles when Victoria strode in, her alliance fighters flanking her. The elders sat on elevated platforms around Lucian's empty throne, their faces shifting from smugness to shock. And there, in chains of enchanted silver in the center of the room, knelt Lucian. His eyes, when they met hers, blazed with a mixture of pride, love, and warning. "The prodigal queen returns," Elder Matthias sneered, recovering his composure. "Just in time for tomorrow's blood moon. You'll take your rightful place at the ritual or watch your husband turn to ash." Victoria walked slowly toward the throne, each step echoing in the silent hall. "You're right, I will take my rightful place." She reached the throne but didn't sit. Instead, she turned to face the assembled crowd. "But not as your puppet. I stand here as Queen Victoria of the Dawn Alliance, protector of both human and vampire kind. And I bring the truth you've tried so hard to hide." She pulled out an ancient scroll, one she'd discovered in the Order's archives. 300 years ago, the First Council signed a blood pact, swearing to protect the peace between our species. You, the current elders, have betrayed that sacred oath. According to vampire law itself, you have forfeited your right to rule. The elders laughed, but nervously now. "Ancient laws mean nothing without power to enforce them," Catherine hissed. "Tomorrow's ritual will give us control over every vampire in existence." "Ah yes, the ritual," Victoria smiled, and for the first time, Lucian saw the warrior she'd become. "The one that requires the willing participation of a queen, the one you need me to complete." She pulled out a vial of silvery liquid. "This is water from the sacred spring of truth, blessed by the first vampire queen herself. When consumed, it prevents any vampire from compelling or controlling the drinker for one full cycle of the moon." She drank it in one swift motion. The elders' faces went pale as they realized their plan had crumbled. Without the ability to compel her participation, the ritual was useless. "Seize her," Matthias roared, but the command fell on deaf ears. The vampire nobles, freed from the fear that had controlled them, began to murmur. Some moved to stand with Victoria and her alliance. "You want to know the real truth?" Victoria continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "The truth that will set us free: love is not weakness, kindness is not folly, and the strongest power isn't in controlling others but in bringing them together. Lucian knew this. That's why he sent me away, not to abandon me, but to let me become who I needed to be." The chains holding Lucian suddenly shattered, not from vampire strength, but from the touch of a human ally who'd snuck behind during Victoria's speech, using the Order's lock-breaking charm. Lucian rose, majestic and powerful, moving to stand beside his queen. "The council is dissolved," Lucian declared, his voice resonating with absolute authority. "A new council will be formed, equal numbers of humans and vampires, chosen by their communities, not their power. The age of fear ends tonight." Elder Matthias made one last desperate move, lunging at Victoria with inhuman speed. But she was ready. With fluid grace, she sidestepped and drew her silver-blessed sword, stopping it just at his throat. "You lost the moment you forgot that true strength comes from protecting others, not controlling them." As the sun rose the next morning, the blood moon having passed without the ritual, London awoke to a new world. Humans and vampires worked together to tear down the walls that had divided the city. Victoria and Lucian stood on the palace balcony, watching the dawn paint the Thames gold. "You became more than I ever dreamed," Lucian said softly, pulling her close. "I sent away a kind bride and got back a warrior queen." Victoria smiled, leaning into his embrace. "And I left thinking love made me weak, only to discover it made me strong enough to save a kingdom." She pulled out the compass, now glowing with a warm, steady light. "It always pointed me toward safety. I just didn't realize until now safety was never a place. It was you, and the courage you gave me to become who I truly am." The story of the vampire king and his brave queen spread throughout the land. teaching all who heard it that sometimes being sent away is not abandonment, but the greatest act of love, giving someone the space to grow into their true strength. And in a world where vampires and humans once lived in fear of each other, they learned that the most powerful magic wasn't in spells or rituals, but in the simple act of choosing trust over fear, love over control, and unity over division. Years later, when asked about that wedding night that changed everything, Victoria would smile and say, "Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the deepest losses. Lucian didn't just save my life that night. He gave me the chance to discover I could save myself, and in doing so, save us all." 2 years of peace had transformed London into a city where humans and vampires lived side by side. But on this particular autumn night, Victoria woke with a start, the compass on her nightstand glowing blood red instead of its usual warm blue. Lucian sat up beside her, instantly alert, his vampire senses already scanning for danger. "Something's wrong," Victoria whispered, picking up the compass. It burned cold against her palm, spinning wildly as if trying to point in every direction at once. Before Lucian could respond, Marcus burst through their chamber doors, his usually calm face etched with panic. "Your Majesties, forgive the intrusion, but we have a situation. Children are disappearing, both human and vampire younglings. 17 in the last 3 nights, taken from their beds without a trace." He paused, his voice dropping. "And there's more. Each family received this." He handed them a black rose, its petals seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Victoria gasped. She'd seen this before in the ancient texts at the Order of the Dawn. "The Shadow Collector," she breathed. "But that's just a legend, a story to frighten children." "Not anymore," Lucian said grimly, examining the rose. "If the Shadow Collector has awakened, we're facing something far older and more dangerous than the Council ever was." He turned to Marcus. "Double the guards around all schools and orphanages. No child walks alone." The next morning, Victoria visited the home of the latest victim, a 7-year-old vampire girl named Lucy, whose human best friend, Tommy, had also vanished the same night. Lucy's mother, tears of blood streaming down her face, handed Victoria a drawing Lucy had made the day before she disappeared. It showed 2 children holding hands under a rainbow, with words scrawled in a child's handwriting. "Me and Tommy, friends forever." "They were inseparable," the mother sobbed. "Lucy would sneak out during the day, wearing special sun protection charms, just to play with Tommy. They said they were going to prove that vampire and human children could be best friends forever." Victoria's heart clenched. These weren't random abductions. The Shadow Collector was specifically taking children who represented the unity between species. But why? Back at the palace, she found Lucian in the ancient library, surrounded by scrolls and texts that hadn't been opened in centuries. "I found something," he said without looking up. "The Shadow Collector isn't a person, it's a curse. 500 years ago, there was a vampire named Mordecai who lost his own child in the wars between our species. In his grief and rage, he performed a forbidden ritual, transforming himself into something that exists between life and death, feeding on innocence and joy." "How do we stop him?" Victoria asked, though she feared the answer. Lucian finally met her eyes, and she saw something she'd rarely seen in them: fear. "According to this, he can only be stopped by the laughter of the lost and the tears of the found. I have no idea what that means." That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She walked the palace gardens, the compass still spinning wildly in her hand, when she heard it, a child's laughter, faint and distant. Following the sound, she found herself at an old well that had been sealed for decades. The laughter grew louder, mixed now with crying. "Hello," she called down. "Can anyone hear me?" "Queen Victoria," came a small voice. "It's Lucy. We're all down here, but something's wrong with the Shadow Man. He brings us food and toys, but he cries all the time." Victoria's mind raced. The children were alive. But if Mordecai was keeping them safe, even caring for them, then what was his real purpose? Before she could call for help, the ground beneath her feet turned to shadow, and she fell into darkness. She landed in a vast underground chamber lit by thousands of glowing crystals. Children were everywhere, vampire and human alike, playing together, their laughter echoing off the walls. But in the corner, shrouded in darkness, sat a figure that seemed to be made of shadow itself, and the sound coming from it was the most heartbreaking sobbing Victoria had ever heard. "You came," Mordecai's voice was like wind through a graveyard. "I knew someone would eventually find us." He lifted what might have been his head, and Victoria saw 2 points of silver light where eyes should be. "I didn't want to take them, but I had to save them." "Save them from what?" Victoria approached slowly, noting how the children seemed unafraid, some even trying to comfort the crying shadow. "From the same fate as my son," Mordecai whispered. "He was born of a vampire father and human mother in a time when such children were considered abominations. They killed him on his 5th birthday. But these children... In 3 days, when the shadow moon rises, a group of extremists from both species plans to destroy every mixed family, every friendship between our kinds. They call themselves the Purists." Victoria's blood ran cold. "The Black Roses, you were warning us." "I can't fight them in this form. I'm trapped between worlds, strong enough only to hide the children here where the Purists can't find them." His shadowy form flickered. "But you united 2 worlds once. Can you do it again?" Before Victoria could answer, she heard Lucian's voice above, calling her name with desperate urgency. "Down here," she shouted. "Bring everyone, we have a new war to prevent." Within an hour, the underground chamber filled with palace guards and members of the Dawn Alliance. Lucian's relief at finding Victoria safe quickly turned to amazement as he saw the children, all unharmed, teaching each other games from their different cultures. Tommy and Lucy ran to their parents, creating a scene of tearful reunions that even made some of the vampire guards wipe their eyes. "The Purists have been planning this for months," Mordecai explained, his shadow form flickering weaker with each word. "They've infiltrated both human and vampire communities, spreading fear and hatred. They believe the peace you've created is an abomination. In 3 nights, during the shadow moon, they plan to attack the Unity Festival." The Unity Festival, Victoria's heart sank. It was a celebration she'd established where thousands of humans and vampires gathered to celebrate their friendship. It would be a massacre. "We have to cancel it," Lucian said immediately. "No," Victoria said firmly. "That's exactly what they want to make us afraid of gathering together. We need to turn their trap into ours." She turned to Mordecai. "You said you can't fight in your current form. What if we could restore you?" The shadow figure was silent for a long moment. "The curse can only be broken by understanding its origin. I cursed myself with rage and sorrow, believing I'd lost everything. But I haven't, have I? These children. They show me what my son dreamed of, a world where being different doesn't mean death." Little Lucy tugged on Victoria's dress. "The Shadow Man tells us stories every night about his son, Oliver. He says Oliver wanted to be a painter and draw rainbows." She held up a picture she'd drawn. "I made this for him." It was then Victoria understood. "The laughter of the lost and the tears of the found," she whispered. "The children's laughter and your tears of joy at finding hope again." She knelt beside Mordecai. "You don't need to be restored to fight. You need to be restored to forgive yourself most of all." The children, without prompting, gathered around Mordecai. Tommy, the brave little human boy, reached out and touched the shadow. "Mister, you saved us. You're a hero, just like Queen Victoria and King Lucian." One by one, the children embraced the shadow figure, their innocence and acceptance doing what no magic could. The chamber filled with brilliant light as Mordecai's form began to solidify. The shadow peeled away like old paint, revealing a man ancient, tired, but solid and real, with tears streaming down his very corporeal face. "Thank you," he whispered, looking at his hands in wonder. Then his expression hardened with purpose. "Now, let me tell you everything about the Purists. Their leader is someone you know, Elder Matthias. He never accepted his defeat and has been building an army in secret." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Matthias had escaped judgment 2 years ago, and they'd assumed he'd fled the country. Lucian's fangs extended in anger, but Victoria placed a calming hand on his arm. "We need a plan that doesn't involve violence. If we fight hatred with hatred, we prove them right." "I have an idea," Mordecai said, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "It involves the children if their parents agree. You see, during my centuries as the Shadow Collector, I learned to manipulate perception and fear. What if we use the Purists' own weapons against them?" 3 nights later, the Unity Festival proceeded as planned. The grand square was filled with lanterns and laughter, humans and vampires dancing together under the stars. Hidden among them were the Alliance guards, and Mordecai stood in the shadows, his old powers still accessible even in human form. As the shadow moon rose, casting an eerie purple light over London, the Purists struck. Dozens of cloaked figures emerged from hiding, weapons raised, hate-filled speeches ready on their lips. But as they moved to attack, something extraordinary happened. Every child at the festival, human and vampire alike, began to glow with soft golden light. They stepped forward hand in hand, forming circles around the attackers. "Why do you hate us?" Lucy asked, her voice amplified by Mordecai's magic so everyone could hear. "We just want to be friends." The Purists hesitated, weapons wavering. It's one thing to attack in abstract hatred, another to strike down children whose only crime was friendship. Then Mordecai worked his deepest magic, showing everyone present his memories of his son's death, the centuries of pain, and finally, the healing brought by the very children they meant to harm. The images appeared in the air like living paintings. Oliver, a bright-eyed boy with his vampire father's dark hair and his human mother's warm smile, playing with children of both species. Then the mob, the fire, the screaming. Centuries of loneliness and rage. And finally, the underground chamber filled with laughing children, proving Oliver's dream had finally come true. "This is where hatred leads," Victoria's voice rang out clear and strong. "To centuries of pain that heal only through love. Look at these children, they are not corrupted or weakened by friendship. They are the future we fought to create." One by one, the Purists began lowering their weapons. Some pulled back their hoods, revealing faces twisted not with hate, but with shame. Among them, shockingly, were both humans and vampires who'd lost loved ones in the old conflicts, their grief twisted into rage by Matthias's poisonous words. But Matthias himself stood defiant. "Tricks and illusions," he snarled. "You've all been bewitched by this false queen and her pet king." He raised a blade forged from silver and iron, deadly to both species. "If no one else will cleanse this abomination, I will." He lunged not at Victoria or Lucian, but at the children. Time seemed to slow as every parent's worst nightmare unfolded. But Mordecai, with speed beyond even vampire abilities, threw himself in front of the children. The blade pierced his chest, and he fell with a peaceful smile. "My son forgives me," he whispered. "I can feel it, protect them, protect the dream." As Mordecai's eyes closed, something miraculous happened. Every person he'd touched with his magic, every child he'd saved, every heart he'd helped heal began to glow. The light spread through the crowd like wildfire, and when it reached Matthias, he screamed and fell to his knees. But it wasn't pain he was feeling. It was every moment of love, kindness, and unity he'd tried to destroy, flooding through him all at once. The blade fell from his nerveless fingers as he experienced, in seconds, the joy of every friendship between human and vampire, every act of kindness across species, every moment of the peace he'd tried to shatter. When the light faded, Matthias was sobbing like a child. What have I done? What have I become? It was Lucy who approached him first, this tiny vampire child whose best friend was human. It's okay to be sad, she said simply. But it's not okay to hurt people because you're sad. That's what Mr. Mordecai taught us. The Unity Festival ended differently than anyone expected, not with celebration alone, but with healing. The former purists, stripped of their hatred by experiencing its opposite, pledged themselves to protecting the peace. Matthias was placed under house arrest, not as punishment, but to receive help in processing the centuries of bitterness that had poisoned his soul. As dawn broke over London, Victoria and Lucian stood where Mordecai had fallen. In that spot, a tree had spontaneously grown, half in shadow, half in light, its leaves a mixture of silver and gold. "He's not really gone," Lucian said softly. "He's become part of the city itself, protecting it." Victoria leaned against her husband, exhausted but hopeful. "You know what the real message is? That our greatest enemies aren't those who oppose us, but the fear and hatred we carry inside ourselves. Mordecai conquered his after 5 centuries. The purists conquered theirs in a single night. Maybe there's hope for everyone." "Including us?" Lucian asked with a slight smile, remembering his own journey from cold king to loving husband. "Especially us," Victoria replied, then gasped as she felt something she'd been suspecting for days but hadn't dared confirm. She took Lucian's hand and placed it on her stomach. "All of us." Lucian's eyes widened in wonder. "A child! Our child!" When Victoria nodded, he swept her into his arms, spinning her as the city awakened around them. Born into a world where being different isn't a curse, but a blessing. And so the story of the Vampire King and his brave queen continued, now with a new chapter about to begin. The child growing within Victoria would be born into a London where shadow and light danced together, where former enemies planted gardens side by side, and where a mysterious tree with gold and silver leaves reminded everyone that even the darkest curse could be broken by the simplest magic of all, the choice to love instead of hate, to unite instead of divide, and to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday.